History isn't a static line drawn on a map. It's a shifting boundary, forged in the spaces where civilizations meet, clash, and blur together. From the bustling merchant ports of Tyre and the towering battlements of Carthage, to the cryptic whispers of the Delphic Oracle and the bloody waters of the Peloponnesian War, this is where the known world met the unknown. Welcome to Frontiers of Antiquity. Join us as we look beneath the surface of the classical world to uncover the human rivalries, the structural conflicts, and the ancient histories that built our modern world.
Picture this. The year is 1876. You are standing in the sweltering heat of the Argive Plain in Greece, looking down into a deep, dusty excavation trench.
Just sweating it out in the dirt.
Oh, absolutely baking. And down in that trench is the German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann. He is digging into what is known as Grave Circle A, right inside the massive stone walls of the ancient citadel of Mycenae.
Which is a huge moment in archaeological history.
It really is. So he brushes away the earth, and there it is, a breathtaking, heavy, golden death mask pressed over the skull of a long-dead king.
Oh, wow.
Right. Schliemann is just absolutely ecstatic. He famously rushes to a telegraph office, wires the king of Greece, and triumphantly declares to the world that he has gazed upon the face of Agamemnon.
The legendary supreme king of the Greeks.
Exactly. The guy who launched 1,000 ships, the man who burned the city of Troy to the ground. And, you see a museum plaque today that says Mask of Agamemnon, and you just trust it.
You assume the plaque is right.
Yeah. But if you actually apply modern science to that trench, well, that beautiful, clean narrative just shatters completely.
It shatters because of a fundamental archaeological mechanism, which is stratigraphy.
Right. Explain how that ruins Schliemann's big moment.
Well, when Schliemann was digging, he was essentially just hunting for treasure. I mean, he was tearing through layers of earth to find gold.
Just bulldozing history to get the shiny stuff.
Basically, yeah. But modern stratigraphy, the science of dating the distinct layers of soil and the pottery sequences within those layers, tells us unequivocally that the layer containing this magnificent gold mask dates to the 16th century BCE.
Okay, the 16th century BCE, but when was the Trojan War?
Right, so the geopolitical conflicts that likely inspired the myth of the Trojan War, those happened around the 12th century BCE.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Schliemann was holding the mask of a warlord who lived and died at least 3 centuries before Agamemnon was even supposed to have been born.
Which means we are starting this deep dive with a massive mystery. We are ripping the museum plaque off the wall because our mission for you today is to dig past the romantic poetry. We want it to separate the mythic tyrannical king from the brutal Bronze Age reality.
Which is so much more intense than the myth.
It really is. We are going to reconstruct the life, the archaeology, and the sheer visceral violence of the historical archetype behind Agamemnon. Because the truth we are going to uncover today is so much stranger, and frankly, so much darker than the standard mythology you might have read in a textbook.
And to really dismantle this figure, we need to trace a chronological roadmap.
Where do we even start?
We're going to start with the grotesque origins of his family's curse. The infamous House of Atreus.
The darkest family tree in ancient Greece?
Without a doubt. From there, we will track the ruthless mechanics of his rise to power, the world-altering logistical crisis of the Trojan War, and his triumphant but ultimately doomed homecoming.
Right. Doomed is putting it lightly.
Yeah. And finally, we will look at his surprising afterlife, the part where the historical warlord is completely erased and he's replaced by a literal god and a symbol used to invent democratic justice.
I can't wait to get into that. So let's start with that family tree. If you want to understand Agamemnon, you have to understand the conceptual framework his entire life is built on.
And for the ancient Greeks, that framework was called miasma.
Right, miasma. If you translate it simply, it means pollution. But I feel like that word doesn't quite capture the sheer biological terror of the concept.
No, pollution makes it sound like smog. It's much worse.
I've always read miasma as less of a spooky ghost story and more like a highly contagious generational pathogen.
The pathogen analogy is highly accurate for how the ancient Greek mind worked. For them, miasma was a physical, almost tangible contagion.
Like a virus.
Exactly like a virus. If you committed a violent crime against your own kin, your own blood, It didn't just break a legal statute, it physically and spiritually infected your family line.
So it's not just that you go to jail, the universe actually reacts to you.
The universe recoils. The gods would refuse your sacrifices. Crops would fail. And crucially, this spiritual virus clung to you, and it was passed down through the blood to your children.
And their children.
Right, demanding more violence to balance the scales. And Agamemnon's family, the House of Atreus, harbored the most concentrated toxic strain of miasma in all of Greek mythology.
Let's look at patient zero of this contagion. It starts with Agamemnon's great-grandfather, a king named Tantalus.
Oh, Tantalus. He really kicks things off in the worst way possible.
He really does. He decides he wants to test the omniscience of the gods. And his brilliant idea to test them is by killing his own son, a boy named Pelops, chopping him up, and serving him to the gods in a stew.
Which is just, it's unspeakable.
That's horrific. Naturally, the gods realize what they are eating. They resurrect Pelops, and they condemn Tantalus to eternal torture in the underworld.
Hence the word tantalize.
Right. But the miasma is already in the blood, because Pelops, the guy who was literally chopped up, grows up and commits murder himself.
The cycle starts immediately.
Yeah, he sabotages a chariot race to win a bride, and in the process, he murders his own charioteer, a man named Myrtilus.
And as Myrtilus is drowning, he curses Pelops and his entire bloodline.
And that dying curse acts as an accelerant. By the time the contagion reaches the next generation, Agamemnon's father, Atreus, and his uncle, Thyestes, the violence evolves.
It stops being just singular murders and turns into systemic, calculated depravity.
Right. Atreus and Thyestes are locked in this vicious, paranoid feud for control over the throne of Mycenae. To strike at his brother, Thyestes seduces Atreus' wife, a woman named Arab.
And Atreus doesn't just exile his brother for this. He engineers a retaliation so horrific it permanently scars the Greek cultural consciousness.
Atreus wants revenge, but he wants it to be absolute.
Yeah, he invites Thyestes to a grand royal banquet under the guise of reconciliation.
Hey, brother, let's let bygones be bygones. Have some food.
Exactly. But the meat that Atreus serves to his brother at this feast is the roasted flesh of Thyestes' own young sons.
It's just sickening.
Atreus slaughters his nephews, cooks them, and feeds them to their father, the cannibal feast. It becomes the defining trauma of the dynasty.
And geographically, we need to place this horror in its real-world context to understand the stakes here. And this all centers around Mycenae.
And if you visit this site today, you aren't looking at a sprawling open city.
No, it's intimidating. You are looking at a heavily fortified core palace citadel sitting on a raised plain that totally dominates the coastal trade routes below.
It is fortified by what we call cyclopean masonry.
I love this detail. Tell them about the stones.
These are limestone boulders so massive, often weighing several tons each, and fitted together without any mortar. They are so huge that later Greeks believed only mythical giants, the Cyclopes, could have physically lifted them into place.
So I'm looking at this dynamic and I keep hitting a wall here.
What do you mean?
Well, if a ruling family is this deeply infected by miasma, if the king is literally feeding children to his brother, wouldn't the general population just revolt?
That's a very logical, modern question to ask.
Right, because in a lot of ancient cultures, the king's moral purity is deeply tied to the health of the state. If the king is polluted, the state fails. So how does a family this transparently psychotic maintain supreme political control over the most heavily fortified trade hub in Greece?
The brutal truth is they don't maintain it peacefully. And they certainly don't rely on the goodwill or the religious devotion of their subjects.
So it's strictly ruled by force.
Exactly. Mycenaean power structures didn't require the king to be a moral paragon. They required him to maintain an absolute monopoly on violence and resources.
But even with that monopoly, a cannibal feast has to cause some political blowback.
Oh, it absolutely shatters the immediate political stability. When Thyestes realizes what he has eaten, the curse detonates the regime from the inside out.
Thyestes and his one surviving son, a guy named Aegisthus, managed to orchestrate a coup.
Right. They violently oust Atreus' lineage. They drive the young Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus out of Mycenae entirely.
So Agamemnon is stripped of his wealth, his status, and his home.
Yes, he is forced to grow up in exile, which means he has to leverage entirely new external military alliances if he ever hopes to take his fortress back.
The exiled brothers flee south to Sparta.
And they throw themselves on the mercy of the Spartan king Tyndareus, who grants them asylum.
This is the moment Agamemnon starts rebuilding his power base. But it's also where we encounter a piece of the historical mythos that is incredibly grim.
And almost entirely whitewashed in standard retellings of the myth.
Right. You never hear this part in the high school version of the Trojan War.
No, you don't. You were referring to the alternate, much older tradition regarding the true origins of Agamemnon's marriage to Clytemnestra.
Most famously recorded by the Athenian playwright Euripides in his tragedy Iphigenia at Aulis.
It's such a crucial text.
Because when we usually hear about Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, it's presented as a standard, calculated dynastic marriage. King Tyndareus marries his daughter Clytemnestra to Agamemnon, and his other daughter Helen to Menelaus.
Just a neat, tidy political package.
Yeah, but Euripides lays out a totally different prequel. Clytemnestra was already married.
Yes. Her husband was a man named Tantalus, who happened to be a cousin of Agamemnon.
Agamemnon wants her, but more importantly, he wants her royal Spartan bloodline to legitimize his own claim to power.
So what does he do?
He violently invades her home, he murders her husband in cold blood, and then he tears Clytemnestra's nursing infant from her breast.
Oh, so dark.
He physically smashes the newborn against the stone ground to sever the bloodline.
It is a breathtaking display of systemic brutality. It's just horrific.
And Agamemnon only spares Clytemnestra herself because the Spartan army, acting under King Tyndareus, intercepts him.
But instead of executing Agamemnon for this atrocity, realpolitik takes over.
Tyndareus essentially forces a truce. And then he forces his daughter, Clytemnestra, to take the man who just butchered her child as her new legitimate husband.
I want you to think about how radically this shifts our entire understanding of the narrative.
It changes everything.
It really does. When we eventually get to Clytemnestra's infamous treason at the end of the story, Homer often implies she's just a weak-willed woman who fell for a usurper while her husband was at work.
But knowing this backstory, she isn't a passive villain at all.
Not at all. She is a severely traumatized captive who has been sleeping next to her child's murderer, quietly biding her time for decades.
The psychological layering is profound. The miasma, the blood guilt of the house, isn't just an abstract concept anymore. Agamemnon has personally brought the contagion into his own marriage bed.
But purely in terms of Bronze Age geopolitics, the brutal maneuver is a total success.
Right, because now he has an army.
Exactly. Armed with Spartan swords and this coerced dynastic alliance, Agamemnon and Menelaus march north back to Mycenae. They overthrow their uncle, and Agamemnon claims the throne.
And he elevates himself to the title found in the ancient Linear B tablets, the Wanax.
Yes, let's translate that. Wanax means supreme king.
But it's not just a poetic title, is it? How did this actual title function in reality?
Well, in the syllabic script of the ancient Mycenaean clay tablets, it is written phonetically as Wanaka. And what makes this so compelling is how the archaeological reality of these tablets perfectly validates the mythological hierarchy.
Meaning Homer wasn't just making it up.
Exactly. Homer depicts Agamemnon not just as a king of one city, but as an overlord who can summon and command other sovereign kings.
And for a long time, historians assumed that was just anachronistic storytelling, just poetry.
Right. But the decipherment of Linear B tablets, which were essentially the administrative spreadsheets of the palace economies found at sites like Pylos, Knossos, and Mycenae, proved it was entirely accurate.
Administrative spreadsheets is a great way to put it. They kept track of everything.
Everything. The late Bronze Age societies in Greece were massive, heavily centralized palatial systems. The entire economy, the bronze production, the grain quotas, the chariot manufacturing, was run from the top down by the Wanax.
He was supported by a highly structured bureaucracy, right?
Yes, including territorial governors and a supreme military commander, a title translated as the Loagitus.
So Agamemnon is sitting at the apex of a massive command economy. He is the undisputed superpower of the Greek world.
And if you want to understand the sheer intimidating scale of that palatial wealth, you just have to look at the architecture they left behind.
This is one of my favorite parts. The most famous structure outside the walls of Mycenae is a monumental tomb called the Treasury of Atreus.
Built right around 1250 BCE.
The engineering required to build this is staggering. The lintel stone, the giant horizontal block resting over the main doorway, weighs an estimated 120 tons.
120 tons. Let that sink in.
It is the largest single stone lintel in all of ancient Europe. And once you walk through that door, you are standing beneath this massive beehive-shaped dome. How exactly did they build that without it collapsing?
It is constructed by overlapping rings of masonry, projecting inward slightly with each tier until they meet at a single capstone at the apex.
It's basically a giant stone beehive.
Exactly. And to grasp its architectural supremacy, You have to realize that this indoor space remained the largest unsupported dome in the entire world for over 1,300 years.
1,300 years?
It wasn't surpassed in scale until the Roman engineers poured the concrete for the Pantheon in the 2nd century CE.
Building a structure like that requires an immense, highly organized labor force,
Deeply centralized wealth, and the unquestionable authority to command both. It was designed to project absolute, unassailable dominance over the surrounding landscape.
I do have to pause on the naming conventions, though.
Right.
We call it the Treasury of Atreus, or the Tomb of Agamemnon. But given the colossal dating error Schliemann made with the Golden Mask, how can we possibly know who was actually buried under that 120-ton stone?
The blunt truth of archaeology is that we don't.
We have no idea.
None. These massive Tholos tombs were thoroughly looted in antiquity, and we have 0 inscriptions inside them naming their occupants.
So where did the names come from?
The titles Treasury of Atreus or Tomb of Agamemnon were actually attached to these ruins hundreds of years later by classical Greeks and travel writers like Pausanias in the 2nd century CE.
So they were essentially tourists.
Exactly. They were looking at these colossal Bronze Age ruins and trying to map the Homeric epics they grew up reading onto the physical landscape around them.
But while the specific name is lost to time, the historical reality remains intact.
Absolutely. A monument of that scale definitively proves that a ruler possessing the vast wealth and supreme authority of a Wanax absolutely reigned at Mycenae during the 13th century BCE.
So the historical infrastructure required for an Agamemnon-type figure is rock solid.
Yes.
That sets the geopolitical stage perfectly. We have a supreme king ruling from an impregnable fortress, managing a vast command economy, backed by Spartan alliances, and holding together a fragile network of heavily armed warlords.
He has built the ultimate war machine.
He just needs a catalyst to use it. And that catalyst arrives when his brother's wife, Helen of Sparta, is abducted by Paris, a prince of Troy.
This incident triggers the mobilization of the entire Greek world, leveraging a brilliant piece of Bronze Age diplomacy.
The Oath of Tyndareus?
Right. Years earlier, to secure his marriage to Helen, who was the most sought-after bride in Greece, Menelaus, relied on this legal mechanism.
Because there were dozens of powerful, armed suitors vying for Helen, her father Tyndareus feared that whoever he chose would immediately be attacked by all the rejected suitors.
It would have been an instant civil war.
So to prevent that, he forced every suitor to swear a sacred oath. No matter who Helen married, all the suitors were bound to defend that marriage with military force if anyone ever tried to break it.
It's essentially a Bronze Age equivalent of NATO's Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all.
That's a perfect analogy. It binds a fractured, highly volatile network of warlords into a single, unified military bloc.
And when Helen is taken to Troy, Menelaus invokes the oath.
But Menelaus isn't the one who takes command of this massive coalition.
No, Agamemnon does, because Agamemnon controls the palatial economy of Mycenae, the largest territory, and by far the strongest navy. He is elevated to the position of strategos autocrator.
Which translates from the Greek as supreme commander.
Right. He becomes the overarching general of an armada that Homer's catalog of ships tells us consisted of 1,186 vessels.
Which is mind-blowing.
Even accounting for poetic exaggeration, it represents an unthinkable concentration of military force and logistics.
And the entire armada is ordered to assemble at a place called Aulis.
Today, that corresponds to the modern towns of Avlida and Vathi, located in central Greece on the eastern coast of Boeotia.
Geographically, Aulis is a natural harbor situated in the Euripus Strait. That's a narrow channel of water separating the island of Euboea from the mainland.
It is practically tailor-made for a massive naval staging ground. It's sheltered from open sea storms, central enough for all the disparate fleets to reach, and large enough to beach hundreds of ships.
But the logistics of feeding and managing an army of that size in a confined space are terrifying.
It's a nightmare. You have tens of thousands of armed men burning through grain rations, sitting idle on the beach.
Because almost immediately, a catastrophic environmental crisis hits. The winds refuse to blow in their favor. The fleet is completely trapped.
And the mythological framework explains this meteorological crisis as divine punishment. The fleet is trapped by adverse winds sent by the goddess Artemis.
Why is she so mad at them?
Ancient sources differ on the exact nature of the offense. In some texts, Agamemnon boasts that his skill with a bow is greater than the goddess of the hunt herself.
Classic, arrogant warlord move.
Right. In others, he or his men trespass and slaughter a pregnant hare in her sacred grove.
Regardless of the specific act, the root cause is pure hubris, arrogance that violates the divine order.
And as the army begins to starve and turn mutinous on the beach, the seer of the army, a prophet named Calchas, delivers a devastating ultimatum.
Artemis demands blood to balance the scales.
Yes, she will only release the winds if she's given the ultimate price. Agamemnon must sacrifice his own eldest daughter, Iphigenia.
This is the critical juncture where Agamemnon's moral authority fractures beyond repair. He is forced to choose between the survival of his coalition and the life of his child.
And he chooses his role as the Wanax over his role as a father.
But the sheer cruelty lies in how he executes the demand. He knows Clytemnestra will never surrender her daughter for a sacrifice.
Oh, of course not.
So he engineers a sickening deception. He sends a royal decree back to Mycenae, instructing Clytemnestra to send Iphigenia to the military camp at Aulis under a completely false pretense.
He claims he has arranged a brilliant, politically vital marriage for the girl. He tells them she is going to marry the greatest warrior of the Greek army, Achilles.
You can just imagine the complex emotions Clytemnestra must have felt.
She dresses her teenage daughter in fine bridal clothes, prepares the ceremonial wedding torches, and sends her to her father, completely trusting the sanctity of the arrangement.
But when Iphigenia arrives at the camp, the illusion shatters. There is no wedding canopy.
Agamemnon has his own daughter seized.
According to some tragic traditions, she is violently gagged so she cannot utter a curse upon the army. She is hoisted horizontally over a blood-stained stone altar like an animal.
And ritually slaughtered by her father's command.
He murders his child to buy a gust of wind.
If we look closely at the cascading consequences of this event, this is the fatal fracture in the mythos of Agamemnon. This single, calculated act explicitly, undeniably justifies Clytemnestra's later vengeance.
It provides a completely different context for her actions.
Exactly. She is a woman who was forced into marriage by the man who murdered her first husband and smashed her first baby.
For decades, she has seemingly endured this.
But now, that same man has weaponized the sacred promise of a wedding to trick her into sending her teenage daughter to a sacrificial butcher block.
She is no longer just an aggrieved wife. She is a grieving mother armed with pure, unadulterated motive, compounded by decades of unresolved, horrifying trauma.
The miasma of the House of Atreus claims yet another victim. The blood guilt compounds upon itself.
But in the cold logic of the ancient world, the sacrifice works.
The winds shift.
The massive fleet rows out of the Euripus Strait, crosses the Aegean Sea, and makes landfall on the shores of Troy.
But the question that haunts the rest of the epic is this. If a man is willing to slit his own daughter's throat just to launch his ships, what kind of monster does he become once he is actually unleashed on the battlefield?
That brings us to the walls of Troy itself. Let's establish the geography here. We are talking about the ancient city of Ilium.
Why was this city so vital? It wasn't just a random fortress.
Troy sat at a massively strategic late Bronze Age choke point. It controlled the maritime traffic passing through the Dardanelles Strait,
which is the crucial narrow waterway connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea beyond.
Whoever controlled Troy controlled the flow of highly lucrative trade goods, especially the copper and tin required to manufacture bronze weapons.
So Agamemnon is there to break a rival empire. Let's look at how Homer characterizes his command style in the Iliad.
Linguistically, his name translates to very steadfast or very mindful.
And he is repeatedly referred to by the epithet shepherd of the people, which sounds incredibly noble, almost pastoral.
But his defining psychological trait in the epic is the exact opposite of mindfulness. It is hubris, excessive, destructive, blinding pride that constantly sabotages his own war effort.
It is the defining conflict that launches the entire narrative of the Iliad.
Agamemnon's arrogance creates an existential crisis for the Greek army. In the 10th year of the war, he claims a captive woman named Chryseis as his personal war prize.
But her father is a priest of the god Apollo.
Right, and when Agamemnon arrogantly dismisses the priest's offer of ransom, Apollo sends a devastating plague. Represented by a rain of invisible arrows, it decimates the Greek camp.
So Agamemnon is back into a political corner.
The commanders force him to return the girl to save the army from dying of disease.
But his fragile pride cannot handle the perceived public loss of status, what the Greeks called time, or honor.
To compensate himself and reassert his dominance, he abuses his power as supreme commander. He forcibly confiscates a different captive woman, Briseis, who had been awarded to Achilles.
Which is objectively the worst possible tactical move he could make.
He publicly humiliates his most lethal asset. Achilles responds by withdrawing his troops, returning to his tent, and essentially saying, "Fine, let's see how long you survive without me."
And Achilles' absence nearly dooms the entire Greek army.
This opening conflict paints Agamemnon as an arrogant, deeply insecure armchair general. A commander who sits safely behind the lines, demands the largest share of the loot, and relies on younger, better fighters like Achilles to do the actual bleeding.
But if you read further into the Iliad, specifically into Book 11, that impression of cowardice is completely annihilated.
Because Agamemnon, when pressed, is a visceral, terrifying berserker.
Book 11 features Agamemnon's Aristeia.
What does that mean exactly?
There is a crucial Greek literary term that translates to a hero's moment of martial glory. Their absolute peak performance on the battlefield where they seem almost possessed by divine fury.
And Agamemnon's Aristeia is widely considered one of the most hyper-violent, blood-soaked sequences in all of ancient literature.
It is pure, unfiltered carnage.
Let me break down the mechanics of this rampage. Agamemnon wades into the Trojan front lines as heavy infantry, and he starts slaughtering opposing champions with terrifying mechanical efficiency.
He encounters a Trojan fighter named Hippolochus.
Agamemnon swings his heavy bronze sword, cleanly severs the man's arms at the shoulders, immediately decapitates him.
And then he physically kicks the limbless, headless torso, so it goes rolling through the dust and the feet of the combatants like a log.
Like a log. It's so gruesome. He is repeatedly described driving heavy bronze spearheads with so much force that they punch entirely through the bronze plates of Trojan helmets,
shattering the skull bones beneath and splashing brain matter against the inside of the metal.
It is so intense, so overwhelmingly savage, that he single-handedly terrifies the premier Trojan champion, Hector, forcing the entire Trojan army into a full panic rout back toward their city walls.
The rampage only ends because a Trojan fighter finally manages to drive a spear straight through Agamemnon's forearm, forcing him off the field. This specific imagery of a heavily armored warlord completely dominating the battlefields actually aligns remarkably well with the physical evidence we have excavated from Mycenaean warrior graves.
We can ground the myth of the Mycenaean warlord in hard, contemporary, written evidence.
Yes, and to do that, we have to look away from Greece entirely and travel east, deep into the archives of the Hittite Empire.
This shift from mythology to documented geopolitics completely changes how we understand the ancient world. We were talking about thousands of 13th century BCE clay tablets written in cuneiform script,
recovered from the royal archives in the Hittite capital of Hattusa.
Today, that is the modern archaeological site of Bozazgale in central Turkey.
The Hittites were a massive, highly organized superpower dominating Anatolia.
And in their meticulous diplomatic correspondence, the Hittite kings constantly complain about a persistent, aggressive group of people they refer to as the Ahhiyawa.
The translation of these tablets was a watershed moment in history.
Why is that?
Because linguists and philologists have demonstrated that Ahhiyawa is the Hittite phonetic transliteration for the Homeric word Achaeans,
which is the primary term Homer uses for the Greeks.
Exactly. These Hittite diplomatic tablets, specifically documents known as the Tawagaloa letter and the Manapahonta letter, clearly document a powerful, seafaring Asian civilization constantly meddling in the politics of Western Anatolian client kingdoms.
Specifically, they detail military conflicts centered around a coastal kingdom the Hittites call Wilusa.
And through linguistic analysis, Wilusa equates to the Greek word Wilios, which later became Ilios or Ilium.
The city of Troy.
The city of Troy.
So, based on diplomatic records from the people actually living there at the time, the Trojan War wasn't just a poetic dispute over a kidnapped wife.
No, it was a prolonged series of commercial and territorial raids by aggressive Greek warlords constantly pushing against the western frontiers of the Hittite Empire.
But the detail that truly bridges the gap between myth and history is a specific tablet called the Indictment of Madawada,
dating back to the late 15th or early 14th century BCE.
In this document, the Hittite king is furious. He is issuing a formal legal complaint about a rogue Western warlord who has been ravaging his vassal states along the coast.
And the scribes write the name of this Greek warlord as Attarsiya. A significant number of philologists strongly argue that Attarsiya is the Anatolian phonetic rendering of the Greek name Atreus,
the father of Agamemnon.
Yes. This bureaucratic text details that this historical warlord, Attarsiya, was operating on a massive imperial scale. He didn't just have a few pirate ships.
He commanded an expeditionary force that included 100 war chariots and thousands of infantry, systematically raiding and destabilizing the Anatolian coastline. Finding these Hittite tablets is literally like unearthing an ancient police report filed by the Trojans, explicitly complaining about the father of the man who supposedly burned their city down.
It proves that the structural framework of the Homeric, epic, wealthy Peloponnesian kings commanding massive chariot forces crossing the Aegean Sea to raid western Turkey for loot and slaves is historical fact.
So Agamemnon himself might be a composite character woven from centuries of oral tradition. But the terrifying breed of warlord he represents was a very real, documented threat in the late Bronze Age.
The archetype of the Mycenaean expansionist warlord is undeniably confirmed, but as history repeatedly demonstrates, all violent empires eventually face the limits of their expansion.
After a grueling 10-year punitive war that exhausts the resources of the palatial economy, Troy finally falls.
Amidst a much wider systemic collapse that is beginning to fracture societies across the entire Eastern Mediterranean.
Agamemnon packs up his incredible wealth of looted gold and enslaved captives, gathers his surviving, war-weary men, and sets sail back across the Aegean.
He achieves what the Greeks called his nostos, that legendary, highly sought-after triumphant homecoming.
But home is not a static concept. Home has been incredibly busy while the supreme commander was away for a decade.
The political vacuum he left behind in Mycenae has been filled.
We have to remember the deep instability of the palatial system. While Agamemnon was fighting in the dirt of the Troad, his wife Clytemnestra has been administering the economy of Mycenae.
And she has not been ruling in isolation. She has strategically taken a lover, a man named Aegisthus.
If we pull the threads of the cursed family tree back together, you will remember exactly who Aegisthus is.
He is the sole surviving son of Thyaces,
the uncle who was fed his own roasted children by Agamemnon's father, Atreus.
The biological contagion of the miasma comes full circle in a devastating alliance. Aegisthus wants the political throne that was violently stolen from his father, and he demands blood revenge for his murdered brothers.
And Clytemnestra wants revenge for her slaughtered first husband, her murdered infant, and most intensely for her sacrificed daughter, Iphigenia.
They have formed a perfectly united front of calculated vengeance, and they know Agamemnon's ships have landed.
Agamemnon arrives at the famous Lion Gate of Mycenae, projecting absolute triumph. He brings with him the vast spoils of Troy, which prominently includes a high-status captive, the Trojan princess Cassandra.
She is not just a prize. She is a prophetess of Apollo, cursed by the god to clearly foresee the future, but to never, ever be believed by anyone who hears her warnings.
The tension in the courtyard is palpable. The Supreme King has returned with a new mistress in tow.
But Clytemnestra is a master political strategist. She knows that attacking an armored warlord surrounded by his loyal veterans at the city gates is suicide.
Instead, she orchestrates a masterful psychological execution to strip him of his defenses.
This brings us to the trap of the purple carpet, famously detailed in the Athenian playwright Aeschylus's tragedy, Agamemnon.
When Agamemnon steps down from his chariot, Clytemnestra welcomes him publicly with incredibly flattering, deferential, fawning words.
She plays the role of the loyal, submissive wife perfectly.
And then she orders her palace servants to roll out a pathway of rich, crimson, purple tapestries, leading directly from his chariot all the way to the heavy doors of the palace.
She tells him, "You are a divine victor. You have conquered Troy. You deserve to walk on something far better than the dirt of the earth. Walk on this."
This is far more than an interior design choice or a lavish welcome. It is a meticulously constructed theological trap.
In ancient Greek culture, this color was the visual manifestation of divine power. Stepping on pure porphyra fabric, dirtying it with the dust of your sandals, was an act of extreme oriental extravagance.
It was an honor strictly reserved for the statues of the gods during religious festivals.
So it is a trap woven from wealth and arrogance. If Agamemnon agrees to walk on that fabric, he is committing public, undeniable hubris.
He is visually and spiritually equating himself with the immortal gods.
And Agamemnon isn't stupid. He actually hesitates at first.
He looks at the fabric and says, "I am a mortal man. I can't walk on this. It's an invitation for the wrath of heaven to strike me down."
But Clytemnestra is relentless.
Yeah.
She manipulates him beautifully.
So it challenges his masculinity. She asks him what his defeated enemy, King Priam, would have done. She goads his pride.
And eventually, the warlord's ego wins out. He takes off his sandals and he steps barefoot onto the purple carpet.
By taking those deliberate steps upon the tapestry, Clytemnestra tricks Agamemnon into severing his own divine protection.
He commits the ultimate transgression in front of the entire citizenry of Mycenae.
He practically signs his own death warrant, ensuring the gods will abandon him the moment he crosses the threshold of the palace and is hidden from public view.
The staging is just cinematic brilliance.
But as we transition into the palace, we have to employ some historical critical thinking, because the actual murder scene, the specific mechanics of how Agamemnon is killed, changes drastically depending on which ancient era is telling the story.
It reflects a fascinating evolution in how Greek literature processed violence over time. In the older Homeric version of the myth, specifically found in Book 11 of the Odyssey, when Odysseus travels to the underworld and speaks directly to Agamemnon's ghost, describes the mechanics of his own assassination.
What does he say happened?
He tells Odysseus that Aegisthus ambushed him in a massive banquet hall. Aegisthus had 20 armed men hidden in the shadows. They invited Agamemnon and his veterans to a feast, and as they were eating, they slaughtered them all.
Agamemnon says he died like, quote, an ox felled at the manger, surrounded by overturned tables, screaming men, and pools of wine.
This is a very standard Bronze Age warlord assassination. It is a violent masculine coup enacted by a male rival over food and wine to seize political control.
But if you jump forward a few hundred years to the tragic version, the play by Aeschylus, which was written and performed in 5th century democratic Athens, the scene is entirely radically different.
The banquet hall is gone. The 20 armed men are gone. Aegisthus is essentially sidelined as a weak coward.
Clytemnestra herself is the primary killer.
Yes. She waits until Agamemnon has disarmed, stripped naked, and is completely vulnerable, stepping into a warm bath.
As he tries to put on a robe, she throws this heavy, web-like headless net over him, tangling his arms so he can't fight back.
And then she strikes him down herself using a weapon called a labris. That's a heavy double-bladed axe.
She butchers him in the bathtub, and then she slaughters the prophetess Cassandra right next to his bleeding corpse.
We have to ask why the Athenian dramatists changed the story so radically from the Homeric tradition.
Right, what was the motive there?
It was a deliberate thematic shift designed for a very specific audience.
Right.
By moving the murder out of a public banquet hall and into the intimate, claustrophobic domestic space of a bath, and by changing the killer from a rival political warlord to his own wife, Aeschylus transforms a standard political assassination into a suffocating psychological horror.
The Athenian playwrights were shifting the focus from feudal politics to the internal moral decay of the House of Atreus.
They were aggressively emphasizing the long-term consequences of sacrificing Iphigenia.
In this version, Clytemnestra isn't just killing a rival king for power. She is executing a child murderer who arrogantly brought his new younger mistress into her home.
It shifts the violence from a battlefield context into a deeply personal, terrifyingly domestic betrayal.
But the end result is functionally the same. The supreme king, the Wanax who conquered Troy, is dead, bleeding out in a stone bathtub, tangled in a net like a trapped animal.
But the miasma, that generational contagion of blood guilt, doesn't die with him. It demands a response. The scales must be balanced.
And this relentless cycle leads to our final transformation of Agamemnon's legacy, because he doesn't just disappear into the dirt as another dead warlord.
No, the cycle of violence has one final, brutal rotation to make. Agamemnon's young son, Orestes, who was sent away during the coup to keep him safe, eventually grows up and returns to Mycenae in secret.
Guided by his sister Electra and commanded directly by the oracle of the god Apollo, Orestes commits the ultimate, most horrifying taboo in the ancient world: matricide.
He murders his own mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus, to avenge his father's blood.
Which means Orestes is now fully infected with the miasma. The moment his mother's blood hits the floor, the Furies are unleashed.
These are ancient, terrifying underworld goddesses of vengeance. They're older than the Olympian gods.
And they exist solely to hunt down and mentally torture anyone who spills the blood of their own family. They start hunting Orestes relentlessly.
This is where the myth takes a sharp, highly politicized turn into philosophy.
How does a civilization stop an endless generational blood feud where every murder demands another murder?
According to the mythos engineered by the Athenians, it ends in their city.
Ancient writers deliberately used the chaotic aftermath of Agamemnon's death to symbolize a monumental shift in human civilization.
Hunted to the point of madness, Orestes flees to Athens. But rather than settling the score with more violence, the goddess Athena intervenes and establishes a formal trial.
Orestes submits his fate to the Areopagus.
The Areopagus was a real rocky outcrop near the Acropolis in Athens, historically recognized in the myth as the location of the very first democratic court of law.
Athena gathers a jury of Athenian citizens to hear the evidence from both sides. They cast their votes into urns, and through divine intervention to break a tie, Orestes is ultimately acquitted.
The Furies are pacified and integrated into the city's religion.
This is the crux of why this specific myth survived the collapse of the Bronze Age and thrived in the classical era. Agamemnon's family trauma is weaponized by later generations.
It is used as the foundational metaphor for the traumatic transition from tribal blood vengeance, the old chaotic way of doing things where families just murder each other for generations, to civic democratic law.
The deliberation of the courtroom officially replaces the swing of the double-bladed axe.
That transition is essential to the Athenian identity. But while democratic Athens was using his story to invent trial by jury, other parts of the Greek world were taking the legacy of Agamemnon in a completely different, almost bizarre direction.
Agamemnon wasn't just remembered in literature or used as a political metaphor. In certain regions, the historical warlord was actively worshipped.
Which is incredible to think about.
This detail completely upended my understanding of the sources. We have two incredibly surprising facts about Agamemnon's afterlife in Greek religion. Fact number 1. In Hellenistic Sparta, specifically at an important sanctuary called Amyclae, he was literally deified.
The locals worshipped him as a god called Zeus Agamemnon.
They explicitly merged the identity of the supreme king of the immortal gods with the supreme king of the mortal Greeks, creating this chthonic underworld deity that represented absolute, terrifying, royal, and divine authority.
Merging a mortal hero with Zeus is a remarkable, highly unusual elevation in Greek religion. It suggests a desperate political need by later Spartans to legitimize their own authority by directly tying it to the supreme commander of the legendary past.
But fact number 2 is perhaps even stranger, and it speaks to the deep animism present in ancient Greek belief.
In the region of Boeotia, specifically in a city called Chaeronea, which is modern Caronia today, the locals practice what we can only call the cult of the living scepter.
The travel writer Pausanias recorded this specific cult, and it is wonderfully weird. The people of Chaeronea didn't worship a marble statue of Agamemnon.
They worshipped his actual wooden walking stick, the royal scepter that Homer claims he held while commanding the troops.
The locals genuinely believed this specific wooden staff had been forged by Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and passed down to Agamemnon.
But they didn't treat it like a relic in a museum. They treated it like a living, breathing entity imbued with divine consciousness.
They didn't even keep it in a massive public temple. The scepter was kept inside the private home of a local priest who was chosen by the community every year, and they fed it.
They fed a stick.
Every single day. They presented this wooden stick with a table full of fresh animal meats and sweet cakes, treating the object as if the soul of the warlord still resided inside the wood, demanding sustenance.
It highlights the sheer totemic power of his mythology. The physical symbol of his authority, the scepter used to command men, became more sacred and terrifying than the memory of the man himself.
I have to step back and reflect on the sheer scale of this transformation. We started this entire deep dive looking down into the dirt with Schliemann, staring at a golden mask, trying to find the historical reality of a single violent man.
But we end up with a concept whose literal walking stick is eating cake in a priest's living room in Boeotia centuries later.
It forces me to ask a fundamental question about how we consume history. Does the historical Agamemnon, the actual flesh and blood warlord, even matter anymore? Or is the mythology just too powerful, too culturally useful for explaining human nature to ever let the archaeological facts get in the way?
That is the ultimate paradox of Agamemnon. The historical figure, or at least the systemic late Bronze Age palatial warlord he represents, absolutely mattered.
Because that breed of king reshaped the Mediterranean.
Exactly. He organized massive logistical naval raids against the shores of Anatolia. He operated within a highly bureaucratic palatial system, controlling unimaginable wealth, trade routes, and human labor.
We see the undeniable shadow of his physical reality in the massive Cyclopean walls. in the engineering of the 120-ton lintel stones, and in the cuneiform wedges of the Hittite tablets complaining about the violent raids of Attarsiya of the Ahhiyawa.
The hard history is buried in the dirt.
But culturally,
the man was erased, and he became a vessel designed to hold ancient Greece's darkest anxieties. He came to represent the inherent dangers of absolute unchecked power.
he embodied the horrifying pollution of family violence, demonstrating how miasma can destroy a supposedly invincible dynasty from the inside out.
And perhaps most importantly for the Greeks who spent centuries fighting each other, his story reflects the devastating generational cost of war. He is the supreme commander who wins the greatest, most famous war in human history, only to lose his daughter, his wife, his dignity, and his own life the moment he steps out of a warm bath in his own home.
It is an incredibly heavy legacy. And as we wrap this up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one last thing to mull over. A final provocative thought that ties the myth back to the dirt.
What was the thought?
Think about the historical timeline. The real historical Mycenaean civilization, the world of the Wanax, the world that built those massive fortress walls and organized those command economies, it all collapsed around 1200 BCE.
It didn't just fade away.
No, it fell in a massive, terrifying wave of fire and destruction that engulfed the entire eastern Mediterranean. It's an event historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, and we are still struggling to fully understand the mechanics of it today.
It was a total systems collapse. Within a few decades, palaces were burned to the ground, the international trade routes for bronze completely severed, the linear B writing system was entirely lost, and population scattered into the hills.
So is it possible that the myth of the curse of the House of Atreus, this horrific story of a powerful, wealthy family that cannibalizes itself, that commits such unspeakable violence against its own kin that it is utterly and completely destroyed, isn't just a story about one bad king?
What if it's the ancient Greeks' way of processing the terrifying self-inflicted collapse of their entire Bronze Age world?
What if the miasma wasn't just a family curse, but a systemic failure of their entire civilization?
It's a chilling thought to end on.